All right, good afternoon, and this will be the second episode of Pick and Pop. Today, I'm going to take a look at the Eastern Conference playoff race heading into action this evening. A lot of good games going on tonight, and it should be a lot of fun. A few really good matchups, of course. The two nationally televised games will be really good ones to look at between the Raptors and the Cavaliers and the Wizards and the Spurs. So, three of those four teams, of course, having implications on tonight, and then we'll take an in-depth look at the Eastern Conference playoff race and each of the teams in it and see where they stand and what kind of position they are in heading into April and May, and perhaps what teams look like they are in the best position to go to the finals. And I feel like this is the first year in a while, at least, that we're in a situation to where the Cleveland Cavaliers and LeBron James, or at least LeBron James, are not the clear favorite in the Eastern Conference. Of course, well documented that LeBron James has been to the NBA Finals 7 consecutive seasons. Of course, the last time it was a team other than LeBron James's team, that was the Boston Celtics in 2010. That was still the big three team. So it just kind of speaks to testament how long it's been. Another way to measure that, I'm a senior in college. I was in 8th grade the last time it was not LeBron James representing the Eastern Conference. And while it may not be as clear cut, I do not want to insinuate at all that LeBron James and the Cavaliers will not make the finals this season. I certainly believe that is still a very strong possibility, but I certainly think it's a whole lot less likely than it was the past couple of years, especially past 3 years that he's been with Cleveland, where each of those seasons it looked like it was, a pretty safe bet that the Cavaliers were going to make their way to the finals. But this year, of course, things just haven't gone as planned. They had the complete revamp at the trade deadline, getting rid of multiple players and adding multiple new ones, bringing in a whole nother system, guys that contribute to the second unit. And the results haven't been a whole lot different since. They're right at 500 since the All-Star break. So it'll certainly be interesting to see how that team reacts in the Eastern Conference playoffs, especially now that they finally have Kevin Love back. But taking a look at the Eastern Conference playoff race as a whole, you're looking at, the 1 through 8 seeds, Toronto Raptors, who picked up a nice win over the Orlando Magic last night, 93-86. They're now 53-18 for the first time in their franchise history. It looks like they are going to be the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. They hold a 5-game lead on that spot. It looks like that is going to be the case. So a really successful season for the Raptors, and they've really adapted the way that they had played in years past. And I talked a little bit about it yesterday, but how it's so much more than just iso ball between Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan, that now you're finally getting a whole lot more out of it. You're getting a lot of ball movement. You're getting a second unit that really gives you production, whether it's CJ Miles with the long ball or whether it's Norman Powell, who's finally been playing some good basketball recently. And then you look at guys like DeLon Wright and Fred VanVleet, who can really shoot it, and Pascal Siakam, who's a big presence up front. And then in that starting lineup, outside of such a dominant backcourt between Lowry and DeRozan, you're also looking at Jonas Valanciunas, who's having the best year of his career. He can finally shoot the ball. Serge Ibaka, who's a different kind of threat than what he was with Oklahoma City. And yeah, they're really just a complete team. This is the best iteration of the Raptors that we have seen yet. Now, with that being said, I don't know how that is going to match up in a playoff series against either the Celtics or the Cavaliers, who are the two other big contenders. Which is why I think tonight's game will be really interesting between Toronto and Cleveland, because it's pitting those two against each other at a time in the season to where you're gearing up for the playoffs. You want to know what guys you want to run with in certain situations, and you want to know how you're playing against these teams when the playoffs are so close from where we are right now. And of course, they start on April 14th, and it's now March 21st. So you're starting to get a better and better idea of what kind of team and what kind of momentum you will be bringing into the postseason. So for the Toronto Raptors, I don't think that this next period of time is incredibly important, but I also think that making sure everybody's healthy and making sure that that identity is not lost when the game slows down in the postseason, that I think is the biggest difference. Are the Raptors going to be able to make that adjustment? Because right now, you look at their potential first-round playoff matchup, it'd be a rematch from what their first-round playoff matchup was last year with the Milwaukee Bucks. And looking at that series from last year, of course, they're two different teams now, but that was a 6-game series where Milwaukee won the 2 of the first 3 games. And you know that the Bucks are certainly very capable of bringing a significant challenge. And while the Bucks have been pretty underwhelming this year, a lot of people had them as a pick to have home court in the first round. They're still a team that has one of the best players in the world in Giannis Antetokounmpo, and they're looking beyond that. They just signed Brandon Jennings to a 10-day deal. It's hard to remember that this is a guy that scored 55 points in an NBA game once, but he really is an extremely talented player, and he's still pretty young. I think he's 28. I'll look to make sure that I am not incorrect on that, but I believe he's 28 years old, and this is a guy that's been around the league for a while. Yeah, he's 28. Debuted in the league in 2009, was one of those guys that went overseas first instead of going to college, played in Italy for a year, and then ended up going to the NBA, had a lot of success right away, was all rookie his rookie year, wasn't really able to replicate that since, but he's played a nice role on the Bucks in a short time there, and they renew him for another 10 days, and then of course then they'll have to make a decision on whether they're going to hold on to him for the rest of the season or not. But I do think that the Bucks are a good team, and that is a team that could potentially challenge the Raptors or the Celtics in a first-round series. Just because you have Giannis Antetokounmpo, Chris Middleton is somebody that is also capable of dropping 30 points a night. Eric Bledsoe is a dynamic threat at the one guard, is somebody that is a good defender. He's very quick. He can also shoot the 3-ball. And then the rest of that lineup, you have some other shooters, whether it's Tony Snell, whether it's the veteran presence of Jason Terry off the bench. Of course, Sterling Brown has had a lot of good games off the bench. So, there's a lot of pieces there that can really contribute to making the Milwaukee Bucks a tough matchup. And, when you have somebody like Giannis that diverts the attention away from everybody else, or, it allows guys like Chris Middleton to have really big games. So I feel like in a series that involves the Milwaukee Bucks, Chris Middleton's probably going to be the biggest X factor. And overall, when you look at the Eastern Conference and see that we pretty much know the 8 teams that are going to be in it, and that's just the seedings that are left up to be determined, the Milwaukee Bucks certainly want to figure out, who they match up better against. And I don't know. Of course, a lot of that will depend on how the Celtics are with injuries. But they also know, they have the experience of playing the Raptors in a playoff series. They were able to win a game in Toronto. And I think that they're going to put aside their record. And I think in general, this year is not typical that these 1-8 and 2-7 matchups are going to be a whole lot more competitive than we're used to seeing. And even with the Rockets and the Warriors, right now, Warriors match up against the Timberwolves, you have Jimmy Butler back in the mix. There's no guarantee at what happens there, especially looking at the Warriors' injury problems that they've had to deal with. And then looking at who the Houston Rockets would play, which right now would be the Utah Jazz. That is still a difficult matchup. Jazz are a team that plays everybody very hard. They're very tough to beat at home. And they've made things really interesting this year at multiple points. They're a team that beat Toronto on the road. And Quinn Snyder's the type of coach that has gotten a lot out of limited offensive talent in general, and they are one of the best defensive teams in the league. And as long as Rudy Gobert stays healthy, nothing's going to be easy facing that team that has also played really, really good ball since the All-Star break and has the unquestionable Rookie of the Year on the team in Donovan Mitchell, who's just been putting up monster numbers for a rookie. And he's a really tough guy to guard. And while he may be a bit inconsistent, he's somebody that can really play a big role in the playoff series, having his first opportunity to really make a big difference there. But of course, we're talking about the Eastern Conference series and kind of diverting myself. But there you see, just in general, these 1-8s and 2-7s are going to be a lot more competitive. And then looking at what the 2-7 would be right now between the Celtics and the Heat. I mean, looking at most of the season, the Boston Celtics have been one of the best teams in the NBA. Of course, they lost those first 2 games. They end up winning the next 16. They held on to that 1 seed in the Eastern Conference for what seemed like most of the season. And now they're pretty much firmly settled into that 2 spot and have dealt with a lot of injuries. And that is excluding the injury that Gordon Hayward sustained on opening night. This is more so recently the multiple injuries and Marcus Smart has had to deal with, and now he's somebody that may be looking to get back in the action if the Celtics make the second round of the playoffs. And then, of course, the injury with Kyrie Irving is he's awaiting a second opinion and is going to miss the next 4 games for the Celtics. And then looking at the injury of Jaylen Brown, who's in concussion protocol, and he's looking to get back in. And then they also lost Daniel Tice for the rest of the season with that right meniscus tear. So a lot of difficulties that the Celtics have had to deal with recently. And that's all something that's going to be addressed and probably exploited in a playoff series. And I think if you're playing the Miami Heat in the first round, which is what the matchup is right now, the Heat and the Bucks are neck and neck in the standings. It would be extremely difficult, even though the talent differential with or without all of the tools for the Celtics still favors Boston. You really have one of the best coaching battles that you could see in a series possible between Brad Stevens, who has shown that he can make something out of nothing every time. And I think if you look at the game last night that they had against the Thunder, that can be reiterated considering what they were able to accomplish in that game, staying in it the whole time and then being able to grind out a win at the end. And then looking what Erik Spoelstra has been able to do at multiple points of his career. I think he's really proven to be one of the best coaches in the NBA. He's really experienced. He's worked with teams like the Big Three LeBron teams that were insanely loaded. And then he's worked with teams that really have no talent at all. I think if you look at last year, the team that started 11-31 and then flipped it to finishing 31-11. And while they didn't end up making the playoffs, I think that was really a remarkable accomplishment and kind of a just proof that Erik Spoelstra is somebody that, you can never count out. You can never count out his team because of what he brings to the table. And I think in a long series, the Heat are deep. They have a really good bench. They incorporate their second unit a lot. And especially with having Dwayne Wade being a factor on that team, they're going to be tough for whoever they play in the first round. Dwayne Wade is one of the most clutch playoff performers of all time, certainly of this generation at the very least. And he's somebody that's really tough to guard in big moments. He's somebody that has been proven to come up with big shots, creating his own shots. He's able to hit them. He's able to incorporate other guys. He's a good passer. His game takes on another level in the playoffs on a consistent basis. A lot of times he's just out of nowhere able to hit threes in the playoffs as well, so don't rule out that happening. Those are all things that you got to look at if you're the team playing the Miami Heat in the first round. If you're the Boston Celtics, if Kyrie Irving's back, I don't think there's really anything to worry about, but if not, then you're looking at a pretty tough scenario. Even though the Celtics have proven they can win without him, they're 7-4 this season without him, it would just be very difficult to be able to beat a team in a playoff series where you're getting their best effort every night and 110% from whoever you're playing. It'd be really tough to combat that without having that game-changing factor like Kyrie Irving. But I think it is still expected until that opinion comes in that he will be returning for the postseason. I think that 99% sure that will be the case. I don't think his injury is really anything that serious. Of course, he does want to get a second opinion on just to make sure the soreness is not some other issue that he has not been made aware of. And this may perhaps necessitate surgery quicker than expected, that it may not be next offseason, it may be this offseason that he makes that happen. So those will all be things that will be in discussion for Kyrie Irving. But I think if he's in the mix there, that's a series that the Celtics should be able to handle, whether they're playing the Heat or the Bucks. And then you have the other 4 teams, and you take a look at the Cleveland Cavaliers, who I kind of already talked about. LeBron James is going to be LeBron James. He's still the best player in the world by a significant margin, I think. I think he's playing the best basketball of his career. He's leading the league in minutes this year, which is just absolutely insane. But I think a lot of the difference makers for the Cavaliers this year in the postseason, of course, a lot of that surrounding on not having that big second playmaker in Kyrie Irving, but now having to rely on a lot of shooters. And you're going to get consistency out of George Hill, who can also rebound and pass the ball. But the big question marks are going to be the production of Rodney Hood and Jordan Clarkson, of course, J.R. Smith as well. Kyle Korver, is going to be able to give you consistent shooting. But the Cavaliers are going to be a big three-point shooting team in the postseason, I feel like, and it's all going to come down to how the young guys like Rodney Hood and Jordan Clarkson, and even though he doesn't shoot threes, still one of the young pieces on this team, guys like Cedi Osman and Larry Nance Jr. as well. How are they going to respond to the pressure of playing in a playoff series? And what may be good for them in that aspect is that at least right now they'd be playing the Philadelphia 76ers. And that's a team that also kind of needs to figure those things out as far as what is their identity, what direction are they going heading into the postseason, because those guys really don't have a lot of experience. JJ Redick, of course, has plenty, but Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid, Dario Saric, this is their first trip in. Robert Covington as well. So, that starting lineup is going to have to learn a lot really quick, especially if they're playing LeBron James in the first round. But that's where I think if you're heading into the playoffs in that position, you just got to think, we don't know any better. We've never been to the playoffs before. And don't treat it like it's anything bigger than what the moment is. And I don't doubt that the Sixers can do that. I mean, I really do think that Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid are two very legitimate stars, guys that are about to be superstars in this league if they are not already. And I think that they are the types of guys that have the capability in a playoff series to just play their game and not worry about it. Of course, you have to see that to make a judgment on it. And LeBron James is going to be himself in the playoffs. So it's going to be about neutralizing everything else and just keeping yourself in the series. But I certainly do not anticipate a first round sweep for the Cleveland Cavaliers. And then for the other two teams, of course, you have the Indiana Pacers and the Washington Wizards. And those are two teams that came into this season with very, very different expectations. I mean, you take a look at what Indiana was looking at coming into this year. They make the trade to get rid of Paul George. You get Victor Oladipo and Domantas Sabonis in return, guys that seem like they're really good players and are, but did not seem to be the kinds of guys that you would build your team around in moving forward already this year. But they end up getting a guy in Victor Oladipo who turns into an all-star, somebody that's a prolific scorer. And all of a sudden they're knocking on the door of the 3 seed in the Eastern Conference after being projected by many, including myself, to be a lottery team. So really outstanding season for the Indiana Pacers. And they're going to be tough for whoever they play in the first round. And, of course, a lot of credit goes to Nate McMillan for the job that he has been able to do to really assemble that team and get them ready for a postseason that they really didn't think they'd be a part of. And it's giving Victor Oladipo, a guy that a lot of people forget was the 2nd overall pick in the NBA draft back in 2013. He's going to get a very legitimate opportunity to be a leader on a playoff team. They're going to be playing a team that's certainly expected to be a bit higher than they are now. Of course, the Wizards have dealt with a lot of injuries, most notably the multiple injuries that John Wall has had to deal with. He is, of course, hoping to get back in time for the playoffs, but I also think at the same time that it's going to be difficult for the Washington Wizards to immediately make adjustments like that. I mean, this is a team that's kind of built up a unique identity without him. Of course, there was some controversy about how they were addressing the issue with John Wall. If there was any turmoil within the clubhouse between the guys that are on the floor right now and John Wall, feeling like they may be moving the ball better without him. But I, of course, do not think that any of that's the case when it's all said and done, that John Wall is one of the most dynamic players in the NBA. And if the Wizards have him back, I expect that you could see the Washington Wizards in the second round of the playoffs, but the Indiana Pacers are certainly nothing to sneeze at. And of course, these seedings can switch up so much. So I think, if you are the Washington Wizards, this is a time of the season that's very, very important to rack up these wins and maybe go for that 3 seed, have a firm hold on home court advantage, and then work to get a more favorable first round matchup. But other than that, is all I have for you today. Taking a look at the Eastern Conference playoff race, which I'll likely take a few more looks at. I know I didn't really talk about baseball, but I will be doing my division previews. I don't know exactly when I'm going to start those. I think on Sundays, so those will be my first uploads for that. a lot of good NBA. Of course, a quick recap of the scores from last night. Raptors beating the Magic 93-86. Celtics over the Thunder 100-99. The Timberwolves beat the Clippers 123-109. The Pelicans beat the Mavericks 115-105. It was the Hawks upsetting the Jazz in Utah 99-94 behind Dennis Schroeder's 41 points. The Pistons blowing out the Suns 115-88, and the Rockets edging out the Trailblazers 115-111. Some good games tonight. Raptors and Cavaliers, of course, that's a nationally televised one starting in just around an hour and a half. And then the Wizards and Spurs on ESPN after that, two really good games. Pacers, Pelicans, Clippers, Bucks. Two other games are certainly ones to watch. Other games in action, the Nuggets and the Bulls, the Knicks and the Heat, the Hornets and the Nets, and the Grizzlies and the 76ers. But that's all I got for you today. Tomorrow I'll probably come back with the Western Conference playoff preview, take a look at all the teams that are in contention in the West and what they're looking for going into playoffs. But other than that, that's all I have for you today. Have a good rest of the afternoon and watch some NBA.